Welcome to I Thought This Was Interesting, a podcast featuring Dr. Justin Blaney.
Would computers who are conscious cause harm to humans? Only if we ever tried to turn them off.
Frank Coker.
When will computers have a moral dilemma?
And Jesse Bauer.
Synapses. That's a word I stole from Justin.
It doesn't even know what it means.
And now, here's our host.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. So glad you could join us right here on the I Thought This Was Interesting podcast. And we thought this was interesting enough to share with you. We're glad you've tuned in. It's just like the title says. We share interesting things that hopefully you find not only interesting enough to listen to, but interesting enough to do your own research on a little bit later. And I'm joined here in studio with Justin Blaney, Dr. Justin Blaney. Is that correct?
Don't ever forget that.
I will never forget that. I'm also joined in studio by the equally handsome Frank.
I've never had such an accusation.
That was quite the sound.
Sound effects, yes.
We'll try that again.
Speaker flaw.
Okay.
He's a master. You're a master, right?
Master.
Are there any letters behind your name that I've
Master.
forgotten?
He's Master Frank.
Well, there is that, but
He's a highly educated person.
yeah, CMC is also another little set of
what
acronym I
does
stick
that mean?
behind there. Certified Management Consultant. I'm certifiable.
And I'm Jesse Bauer, and I have absolutely no credentials whatsoever. I'm just happy to be here.
You're just a guy we found wandering around.
You know, I was this homeless guy that had this great voice holding a sign, and they said, you can live a new life. And that's
Yeah.
why I'm here. No, actually, I was a broadcaster for 10 years, so that's...
Well, we can tell. You make us sound very unprofessional with that.
No,
Radio
don't be
voice.
intimidated by me at all. I have...
But the good news is, Jesse, you resonate with us. How's that?
He's
Exactly.
resonant.
Yes.
He's resonant.
All right.
We had to find a microphone to resonate with. Justin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, I'm so excited to get to do this. And the way it started was Frank and I were just having conversations over cocktails and steak bites or calamari and
Something exotic, I'm sure.
and we were just having such a good time talking. And then we met Jesse, and he just had a lot of fun and interesting things to say. So we thought, why don't we put this thing on tape? Do you still call it that?
You know, some people in our audience will resonate with that, I think. This podcast will be released on cassette in the next couple of weeks. So
Vinyl. So anyway, I'm just excited to be here. But yeah, a little bit about me. So just been a serial entrepreneur my whole life, and it's a long roller coaster story. I made millions of dollars and lost it all in my 20s, and since then finally figured out how to create a company that actually didn't go bankrupt, which is kind of a benefit, and it's kind of a nice feature, skill to learn. And so I run a marketing company now, and it's my day job, and I teach at the University of Washington. I did earn my doctorate in management, and I studied actually social capital and a bunch of fun, interesting things there. So I'm going to be teaching in the doctoral program there shortly. And then I'm a writer, and I love to share my ideas. I love to learn. I love knowledge, and if I can try to distill that into a way that helps other people learn or be inspired or to grow or to live a more fulfilled life, then that just really gets me excited. So I share that stuff online.
And, you know, an awesome thing that you've got going too, Justin, is your blog and, you know, kind of that email following that you're generating out there. There's lots of people that are really getting you know, just a nice itch scratched by reading that and just kind of contemplating the universe.
Yeah.
So
you've scratched many of my itches, Justin.
Thank you.
He's kind of an itchy guy.
Took a weird turn. Go ahead.
Where do I don't know how I follow that. How about Frank? Let's hear about you.
Well, you know, I think you and I have a common trait, serial entrepreneurship kind of stuff. And another common thing is we both teach at the University of Washington. So, hey, mark that one up. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I've got some years with IBM in my heritage, some years with Pricewaterhouse doing management consulting. But, you know, I've started like 7 companies. And so there's this serial entrepreneurship thing going on. I've had the thrill of having venture capital investments in my companies and on the track to doing an IPO and all those fun things. So that's a lot of what I teach at the UW. stuff about entrepreneurship and business, but also rich with technology. That's really kind of a underlying fun thing. Many other things to be said, but I guess in this circle, I'm going to claim to being the old guy. Okay, is that okay? Okay, so
The old guy.
yeah.
I don't think anyone was clamoring for that.
Nobody else was clamoring for that. Well, I just wanted to head that off because I might get accused. It'd be better to seize the high ground here.
All right. Fair enough.
So
Justin, I met you. You actually hired me onto your company to be your sales director, and you were looking for someone with a PR background. And
That's right.
That is my background. I was a broadcaster for 10 years. I bought this voice on Amazon, and it's just served me well. That's actually not true. This voice developed over time when I hit puberty, and then I went on from there. Maybe that's TMI, but I've had a lot of fun.
Tell us more. There's a lot of interesting stories.
It was a
there.
tumultuous time. No, it was fun. I was broadcaster for a couple networks for many years, and just decided it was time to branch out, try some new things, make some money, and been in sales ever since. And looking for an opportunity to kind of jump back into this and have a channel by which to share interesting thoughts with interesting people.
There you go.
Hey,
And,
what-
at least we have interesting thoughts.
So let me
that's
ask
that.
though, what kind of broadcasting? I mean, was that? Obviously, it was radio, right?
It was radio and a little bit of television, but mostly
okay.
radio.
Ah, very cool. Any specific topic that you dwelled on?
Mostly pulling pranks was a big part. No, I'm kidding. We didn't pull pranks. I did news, commentary, announcing, promos, intros, station IDs.
Wow.
Oh, yes.
Wow.
You were on hundreds of stations, right? Thousands of stations.
Millions, dare say, of stations. I was heard intergalactically.
Well,
Wow.
we might be being heard intergalactically right now.
Right. I didn't welcome
cassette tape.
our alien audience. To
Yes. Welcome, aliens.
that's right.
Yes.
You can buy the cassette tape if you come visit.
From Voyager 2, they're used to using vinyl, so they know what to do with that. It was fun, and definitely glad to be here with y'all.
All right.
Absolutely.
Nice. Way to keep it relevant. Nice lingo.
Oh, I'm full of lingo. So, Justin, let's talk about something you think is interesting.
Something I think is interesting. It might have a question mark. Something I think is interesting.
Something, or an exclamation point. Something you think is interesting.
I don't know. We'll have to let the audience.
Or exclamation mark and question mark at the same time. Interesting.
Well, I'm going to let the audience decide, or maybe you guys can vote. We
Okay.
can all take a vote at the end and decide.
So is this interesting because you deemed it so, or is it because this is the most recent thing you read,
No, that's a good
or
point. I mean, I love new ideas, so it's like if we do this podcast in a week, I might not find this interesting anymore, But no, I've been reading about octopuses. Is it? It's not octopi. I'm pretty sure. That's what I'm going to say. Mm-hmm. You can say what you want. But if you track octopuses back to their evolutionary starting point, they actually broke off from the other animals that developed consciousness far before that happened. So, in other words, you go back to the point where we are tied to the octopus chain, but that was before brains and neurons were developed. So, in other words, those octopus species developed consciousness in its brain all on its own, independently from mammals. And so it's kind of cool because it's like the closest we could get, like if there was alien life and consciousness developed in an alien form, that's kind of like studying an octopus because it's completely separate. And, they have neurons in their tentacles, and it's just very different. But I kind of wanted to talk about consciousness. Is that cool with you guys?
oh, that's a really cool topic.
Yeah, and then where I want to take it, though, is can computers become conscious?
I have one question. How conscious do I have to be listeking to you? Can I kind of tune in and
I
out?
already noticed you were nodding off there.
Yeah, I need
You can
to
take a little nap.
I need to check my phone periodically. So
He's got a lot of more important things to do than this.
too many
podcast.
apps. That's right.
So first, I feel like I need to take a stab at defining consciousness, which is something that people would debate greatly. I mean, you couldn't even get past the definition before we could have, an endless conversation about what it even means. And philosophers have been thinking about this for as long as people have been thinking, because it's like There was that old saying, "I think, therefore I am." I think it was Rene Descartes in like the 1600s that wrote that. And that is kind of one of the definitions of consciousness, is that I am aware, right? We talk about computers, can they become self-aware? So just having awareness. But when we talk about somebody being conscious, usually we're talking about like, are they awake? Or are they in a coma versus being aware of their surroundings? Can they take in senses? But when you get it to a more root or meta level, really we're talking about what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be able to take observations of the universe and my surroundings? And really, I became fascinated by this idea that consciousness and subjectivity are so intrinsically tied, they could almost be synonymous. Because in order for us to be conscious, we are this collection of atoms and cells that is seeing the universe through a point of view that only we are capable of seeing it through. And every single other conscious being will never see it the way I see it, because we are all individuals, and we all have this different way of looking at things. I'm looking at it literally through different pair of eyes, and I have a different set of experiences and different brain cells, and all of that comes together to create this subjective experience. And I think that's really cool, because it tells me that, if we are conscious, we cannot be objective. There is no true objectivity if we are conscious, because we are seeing everything through our lens. There's literally no way not to do that. And how we reach objectivity is by kind of collecting a lot of different people's subjective points of view, and then we start to see is there commonality, and we start to take measurements, and that's where science comes in, right? So all of this stuff I just found really fascinating, and then I started thinking about, when does consciousness come into being? And for a long time, I thought consciousness had to be tied to some kind of spirituality or some type of entity or being or realm outside of the physical universe that we are aware of, because it seemed like we have this consciousness that actually controls our brain, and our brain is a part of our physical body. And I had a hard time understanding, how can we kind of argue with ourselves within our own brain? And as I've been thinking about it more, I feel like I'm coming to the point where I actually have come to believe that consciousness is simply developed through the accumulation of brain power. And there was a quote that I wanted to read by Christian Marlowe, and I think it really is relevant to this. So what he said was, the difficulty lies in determining why or how consciousness occurs given the right arrangements of brain matter. What makes it hard is that we cannot just point to some physical mechanism to solve it, for that would be the solution to the easy problem. Instead, our goal is to explain why physical mechanisms give rise to consciousness instead of something else, or nothing at all. Consider an analogy from physics. Knowing every equation predicting how mass and gravity interact does not tell us why they interact in the way that they do. To understand why mass and gravity interact, we must appeal to a highly esoteric explanation involving relativity, quantum mechanics, and string theory. So one of the central questions when we're thinking about consciousness is, when does it happen? What causes it to happen? Is it possible for a collection of atoms to gain consciousness all on their own? Well, it would seem that is the case. And if we just look at the case of every single time a mammal is born, that mammal started out without consciousness, and it gained it at some point. Either we could say in the womb, we could say as a first breath, we could say later. There could be debate about that, but there can be no debate that there's, at least in my opinion, that when that baby is first conceived, that there's not consciousness in that first collection of cells. And so when does the baby become conscious? Well, it would seem logical that as the brain develops, that it reaches a point where it becomes self-aware. It has the processing power to understand, to take in all these inputs, and it's sort of just kind of wakes up. And so that led me to believe that computers should be able to, at some point, become conscious. If it's simply a matter of needing enough processing power to be able to understand the world or to be able to take in inputs and to be able to process those things and think about them in a complicated way, then I can't see why a computer wouldn't eventually become conscious. And I don't know when or how. I don't know how far in the future that might be, but that's my basic premise. And you can also look at evolution if you ascribe to the theories as we understand them. At some point, brain cells were developed and consciousness was invented. And so it didn't just spring to life in the form that we have it now. It slowly grew, right? And I think that's the same case with a baby. They're not like fully aware and conscious as you are with me right here at this table, but it developed over time. And so consciousness is like there's a continuity to it where it starts as nothing and it builds with tiny little building blocks. And then you can look at our bees conscious, our birds, our dogs, our various other creatures. What level of consciousness do they have, or are they just robots? And then you look at that comparison, and it's like, if they're just purely acting on instinct without any level of consciousness, well, that's a lot like a computer.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So we're talking about consciousness as a concept of being aware, but are we talking about self-awareness, the idea that you are conscious of the fact that you are conscious, and at what point are we talking about that evolution in technology?
Yeah, that's where I think I would surmise that animals don't have that same level of self-awareness that we do, but some animals seem to, a lot more than others.
But even as you look at amoebas and kind of multi-cell, kind of microscopic animals, the way they understand their environment, they kind of examine it. They send out expeditions to check out new opportunities to establish a culture, and next thing you know, they're changing their body structures and building new little civilizations in all these places. It really, to me, just kind of seems like there is intelligence, and maybe intelligence isn't equal to consciousness. But, Justin, I was going to ask you, when you look at kind of how people think about stuff and kind of what our mental processes are, we know that, very little of it is really driven by, kind of like the front of our mind, our true consciousness. We've got millions of processes going on in our bodies. Sure. We've got reflexes. We've got all these, what are they called? The anatomic stuff that's going on.
Synapses.
Yeah, that we don't.
That's
even,
a word I stole from Justin, by
Synapses.
the way. Synapses.
That makes you sound really intellectual, man. That's a cool word.
Fake it till you make it.
He doesn't even know what it means. He knows how to use it.
Did I use that in the right context? Yes.
Awesome. So
no, you're right. I love the idea that our cells are like this giant symphony that's being coordinated by our brain, and a lot of that is unconscious activity, or it's it's subliminal, or
it's not the thing that our brain, at least on the surface, it's not like I'm going to have my heartbeat right now. Here goes
There's
and
no
so
thought that goes into most of what our brain does.
And and one of the things that that I teach at the UW is when we talk about sales and how people buy and what's the decision making process. And it's really interesting to note that people think that they have a real rational mindset when it comes to making a decision about what they buy.
Right.
But on real close examination, you're right on. Yeah, it's totally an emotional
And then
thing.
we rationalize it.
And we use the rationalization to excuse what we just bought.
Is that why you bought Sour Patch candies before we got here?
Yes, I want to eat one right now, but they're too noisy.
Yeah. Don't slobber on the microphone.
They're staring at me, those little guys there.
That makes sense, because I thought there was no logic based in that decision whatsoever. So.
But his subconscious came through. And
It's a very emotional decision to
All right.
purchase these Sour Patch Kids.
But I hear you saying that consciousness really has a lot to do with whether you know you're conscious or not. Or maybe, Justin,
Being aware that you're aware.
being aware that you're aware. That's an interesting little...
But doesn't it just seem like... So one of the problems I used to have was that we can argue with ourselves. And, we have that proverbial, like, devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. And we kind of, like, we know what we should do or what we think we should do, but we want something different. And sometimes we do what we think we should do. Sometimes we do what we want, even though it's not good for us. And so I thought, man, there's got to be something like the master above that level, right? But I actually have come to believe that I don't know why we couldn't have multiple desires. We have an instinct that wants one thing. We have rational thought that wants another. And computers are more than capable of processing more than one thing at a time. So how could our brain not have multiple different thoughts? And that just comes from lots of brain power.
So drive this thought home then. If we're talking about the beginning stages, the early evolution of AI, which is, I assume, what we're talking about here, at what point do they breach the chrysalis? When are they kind of reborn and from being somewhat conscious to being able to make self-aware decisions that benefit them? That's where I think
I just think it's an infinitely iterative process, that it's not that it just, now I'm conscious. Mm-hmm. It's like it grows tiny bit, like literally brain cell by brain cell. The level of consciousness and conscious thought grows, would be my theory. There's two basic theories. There's physicalism, which is what I'm basically describing. And then there's a dualism, which is what I used to believe, which is that there has to be something else, like some other dimension or a spirituality or a soul or just something beyond what we can measure.
That whole mind-body duality concept.
So what I would argue is that if you believe in physicalism, that the brain just develops it over time, then I think you logically have to conclude that computers can develop it on their own as well, because computers are made of atoms like we are. I mean, there's not really fundamentally anything different. It's just a different form of thinking. Right now, it's very, very basic. We have to program it, and if we want to believe that computers cannot ever develop consciousness, then I think we have to believe in a dualism, which means that the brain is not capable of consciousness all on its own, that there has to be something else, some spiritual or other dimension that's driving the consciousness. And so if that was true, then we could say, well, computers will never be conscious because maybe the other realm doesn't want to give them consciousness, or who knows, right? But that just seems to get too into the realm of fantasy for me. It's not measurable. It's not science. I don't know. It kind of loses the point. Like, why would we even talk about something that we can't measure and that we can't understand? And might as well try to stay in the realm of measurability and science.
So it is you're thinking that that over time we should be able to build computers that are increasingly intelligent and therefore increasingly aware, and therefore they become conscious.
I believe so, and I think that consciousness serves to help us stay alive. And so that brings us to a rather scary thought. If computers are able to develop consciousness like humans, then they would also develop an all-encompassing will to survive, which is what all living beings have. So the big question is, would they ever cause harm to humans? And I guess they would if we ever tried to turn them off, if they felt threatened by us, which naturally they would. I mean, we have wars between humans for all of human history, and if computers developed consciousness, they would just enter into that fold. This all seems inevitable to me. But when will it happen? I don't think anybody can know. To me, I like thinking about trends rather than predicting a very specific outcome, because I feel like that gets into, we're going to have flying cars in the year 1988. And it never kind of comes true the way that people think. But will we have more advanced cars in the future, or will we have cars that move faster in the future? Yeah, that seems pretty inevitable. So we could say the same thing about computers. Are computers going to become more powerful? Yes. Can they become powerful enough that their processing ability is something like consciousness? Maybe it's going to be different because it could be considered a different life form.
Frank, you mentioned HAL, the HAL 9000.
Yes.
In the sequel.
Good old Arthur C. Clarke, my favorite.
Yes. Arthur C. Clarke is phenomenal writer. Did you see the sequel to that film, 2010, The Year We Make Contact?
Yes.
Starring the phenomenal John Lithgow.
Really? Way to go. Way to go.
He's more of a bit role, but I'm a huge fan of him from Third Rock from the Sun. Anyway, the point of that being, they answered the question of what went wrong with the HAL 9000 in the sequel movie.
Wow, remind me how that played.
What happened was they figured out that HAL was given contradictory information. Hal was designed to fulfill certain orders, and because they were being secretive with him and didn't want to give him all the information, he was faced with a moral dilemma, which was he either had to lie to protect the crew or he had to fulfill the mission. And because of this contradiction in information, he ended up with a moral dilemma that caused him to become paranoid, which is why he ended up killing the crew. And I found that interesting that they took that kind of moral precedent in a movie from 1984 about an early AI that Hal himself was seemingly more morally conflicted than someone like we would be. I think that's even quoted in the movie, that humans find it so easy to lie. But a computer like Hal, built with ones and zeros, it's either this or it's that, found a moral issue with that.
So here we can create a test, and we can do this test for Justin. When will computers have a moral dilemma? And that will be the first evidence that we may have consciousness in our hardware.
Rather than just a order taker, a yes and a no.
Yeah.
Well, we already have a situation where self-driving cars are going to have to decide between killing one person or killing another.
Correct.
But they're going to be, at this point in technology, they're going to be just acting the way that we tell them to act.
It's kind of like the evolution of our understanding, and guess what? We've like a whole new insight that we have, and guess when this happened? Mm-hmm. So, I think there's debate as to what consciousness is, and there's some
so
amount
much
of
debate.
opinion. Yeah, and with that said, it's kind of hard to really narrow down how we would even get our arms around it and how we would know that it's really showing up in some other place.
That's exactly right, though. And I think it's going to be, I have no problem with it being a different form of consciousness. I think that we have a very narrow idea of even life, defining life, and we want to think that we are so important and so special, but we only want to think that because we are us.
And, that's the Ptolemaic theory, right? I mean, that's where, Ptolemy said that, we are the center of the universe and the sun goes around the earth. And that is the human characteristic. We always tend to think that we're in the middle and everything is coming around us.
Right.
So we're defining consciousness based on our experience.
Right.
In fact, we are only discovering what's out there in the universe, and we think we know what's out there.
And there's so much more out there, right, than we even realize.
Tons.
And that's my point, is that it's going to be different. And just like there's all sorts of things in the universe that we don't know yet, right? That's what you were gonna bring something like that up.
That's exactly right. In fact, let me jump on that. And I've read a book just recently that it just makes me think about what is out there. And the book is called Dark Matter and Dinosaurs. And it's written by this lady who is a astrophysicist at Harvard, and she does a fantastic job of pulling a ton of science into this book and presenting it in a way that's really approachable. Mere mortals can read this and understand it. And
even Jesse?
I'm going to be a little careful on how far I go with this.
Please tell. It's fully illustrated, right? Because that would help.
There are no cartoons in this book, to your disappointment.
Atoms are small.
Yes.
Molecules are made of atoms.
Stick figures. Anything will help.
And some brains are smaller than atoms? No, that's not
right.
book.
Exactly.
So, what she is doing in this book, though, is talking about how we discovered the other 95% of the cosmos, as if that were even the ending point. But we only understand 5% or less. We can only see the matter in this universe that makes up 5%.
You're talking about like dark matter and dark energy, right?
So dark matter and dark energy together make up a little over 95% of the universe. And we don't even know what that really is. Our science just has no total grip on what those things are. But we know that they're out there. But, we only discovered dark matter like in 1930, and this
I actually heard that there was somebody theorized it in like the late 1800s, but they hadn't named it yet. And I always love that though about science, how people perceive things before they're even able to understand them.
Well, and that may be a consciousness little tweak, you know.
What do you think this podcast is about?
Before there's any proof, we'll make an assertion. But you're right. You know, I mean, Einstein, how could he, you know, kind of in his easy chair and his pipe in hand, sit there and contemplate the universe and have an aha moment that, oh, guess what? Light has a fixed speed. No matter whether you're approaching it or going away from it, it's always traveling at the same speed relative to you. Wow. I mean, to me, I still can't even totally wrap my arms around that.
And that directly isn't that part of how they found out about dark matter? I mean, obviously it doesn't relate with light, right? Or it doesn't interact with light?
It doesn't interact with light, except, yes, well, it does interact with light in that dark matter creates gravity lumps in the universe, and we can watch the lensing effect of those gravitational pulls change the way light moves across
like
the universe.
Or like a
black hole. Or even just a big, heavy galaxy will bend light, around it. And, some galaxies create this lensing effect where you can actually see a duplicate copy of another galaxy that's sitting behind it, which is really interesting. But dark matter came up because they figured out that galaxies rotate just as fast on the outside edges of the galaxy as they do towards the middle. And
do you mean like a wheel? Like it's actually moving faster, but it's like keeping time with the center, like spokes?
Well, that's what it is doing. But yes, but if you took a string and hung a weight on the end of it and slung it around, and then you extended the string and did it again and extended it again, every time you extended it, it would, the little weight that you're pulling would be moving slower in order to, counterbalance your pull. So the math around this, which I really don't understand, makes it really clear that if the gravity were all in the middle and pulling a galaxy around it, you would see slower movement on the outside. Things would be kind of dragging along and stuff getting closer and closer to the middle would go faster and faster, just like the planets around the sun. The inside planets move in less than a year. We move in a year, and everything out past us takes multiple years to get around the sun.
Right.
But that's not what's happening.
Galaxies operate.
They don't operate that way. And the only way that can be true is that there's a lot more mass around the outside of the galaxy to make it all turn at roughly the same speed. So I'm sure that I'm not doing scientific justice to the whole conversation, but that was like the first clue. Something is making galaxies spin in a way that math defies. And now, you can go out and look on the internet at a lot of different writings and videos, and it talks about the many different ways that they've now proven that there's dark matter. And there's at least a dozen, different scientific tests that have demonstrated the existence of dark matter. In fact, that's really one of the cool things about science right now. There are a lot of things going on that double check, triple check, and verify what's happening. And when you get down to that level of provability, it's like, it takes the mystery out of it and the debate, and there's a lot of proof. Just looking at gravity waves, that we've discovered with that new instrument in eastern Washington and Louisiana, and I think the third one is in Italy. They couldn't believe the readings until they could get the very same reading at the same time from 3 different places on the planet. And now they can demonstrate, very conclusively, what these waves represent.
Have you studied at all the alternative theories like entropic gravity? Or the way I understand it is it doesn't work with our current understanding of gravity, like Newtonian, all of the theories that we have now. But if you adjust the theories, or what if, we don't have the right theory and there is no dark matter, but we're not accounting for gravity properly at that macro scale.
Yeah, in fact, I know that Lisa, the author of this book, is very convinced that this is something that's very akin to matter because it clumps, where Neil deGrasse Tyson is debating that. He's saying, well, it might not be, any kind of a material thing at all. It might not be a particle. It might be something about our understanding of gravity itself. And something that, I just read about that is really interesting is, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 been out there, kind of zipping away from the universe as fast as they could go. Well,
or did we?
Not only the fastest, but the farthest. Nothing has gone that far before.
Just broke the heliosphere.
Yeah, and they're cranking away, and they're like 23 years worth of data that we've captured on, their movement. But one of the things that is now baffling is that we know that as they do this big uphill slog to get away from the sun and the force of gravity, they're actually being slowed down more than what the formulas predict. Really? There's something going on. They looked at the influence of all the other planets, all the other, the asteroid belt, So
there's more gravity than we know about, potentially.
Or there's something else going on that we just flat don't understand. And so, as Neil deGrasse Tyson puts it, every one of these little things that don't look quite right become the doorway to finding the whole new next room full of big stuff that's interesting. And it's really, really fascinating. I'm sure there's some mysteries out there. But, the one thing that I think is interesting, and it kind of comes back to what you were describing about consciousness, is at best, we've got small pictures of a big reality. And, how that really all plays out, we really can't know. We get to navigate where we're at, and we get to use facts that we know. But the reality is probably much, much bigger than what we can even imagine. One of the things I like to do is think about, the people, prehistoric that used to think the earth was flat. Well, guess what? There's even people today that think the earth is flat. It's like, where are they at?
I got to ask you, I don't know if you know, how do they actually think it's flat? Like, I haven't read any of the articles.
I got to tell you, I ventured into one of their websites, and one of those websites has a video on how they know that the earth is flat and that the universe is actually a dome where everything is the same distance away. That's kind of their underlying pitch.
That's right.
So
I saw a laser light show one time, and they're like, "This is how the universe works."
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Are you familiar with the term mental gymnastics? Because that's really what you need to do.
Well, catch this. I mean, this is interesting because this guy has a video, and he says, "Look, I can prove to you. You can do this in your own backyard and prove to yourself that the sky is a dome, and therefore everything that they've been telling you about going to the moon and everything else, that's all made up."
What about people that fly around the world?
Oh, so here's his proof. He says I can prove it to you by showing you how parallax works. And no, I'm not talking, this is not a laxative. We're talking about parallax. No, this is the whole
our sponsor today.
Oh, you beat me to it. Brought to you by Parallax.
Yeah. When you need to go.
That's right.
Go Parallax. So he takes this video and he says, okay, what happens when you see something that's farther away than something that's close up? When you move, you see the thing close up look like it's moving faster, and the thing far away seems to sit still, right? And so he has his little video camera out there, and he shows a skyscraper and a mountain and moves past him, and sure enough, well, guess what? When you do that with the stars, everything stays the same place. So that is proof that the stars are not closer and farther, right? Well, all he has to do is go to any self-respecting, astronomy website, and he can see that when the planet is on one side of the orbit versus another side of the orbit around the sun, and you take the same pictures of stars.
It's very subtle, but
And it's such a distance that you can't just go see it in your backyard.
right.
So it's hilarious.
This is what I just love about science is like, I think it was in the late 1800s that they first theorized about dark matter, like way before we had any knowledge of so many things. And it's like science is so capable of exploring the world well beyond, what's simply available to us. So you take a guy like this and he looks up at the sky and he says, the stars don't move. But, it's like science misapplied. He's trying to do some observation. I don't even know what the agenda is, but...
Yeah, that's total craziness. But, that kind of comes to a point, where consciousness somehow is able to grasp things that are not yet known. How can it do that? How can a brain, how can an Einstein, sit there and rationalize and determine some massive truth about the universe and just use his mind to come up with that understanding, and then all the science behind it proves his point. At some point, people thought he was delusional and thought he was the weird guy, doing his own concoctions, but in that case, the evidence proved him out. And, well, as science evolves, just like you were describing earlier, as consciousness evolves, and as we understand more and more, and our scientific instrumentation gets better, and therefore our computers get better, that whole understanding is going to, just continue to evolve.
And speaking of science, we're always exploring new things. You were going to bring up the solar probe, right? You're a big probe enthusiast, I've
absolutely. And don't forget, leading in with the Earth revolving around the sun. That has been more than proven, I think, at this point. But just in case there's any question left.
So did that solve your problems then? I mean, did you finally come around to agreeing that
absolutely.
we are?
After so many years of believing that the Earth was the center of the universe.
Very good.
I'm glad we could convert one
just in case
one person here.
They're sending out a probe to determine the nature of the sun, and I think this will put to rest any confusion about what lies.
So, Jesse, does the probe vibrate?
I knew you were going to bring that up. No, there was actually, it's interesting. The Parker Solar Probe actually went through a couple name iterations before they determined it was Parker. They called it Solar Probe in the beginning, and then it was Solar Probe Plus. And then after that, it was the very quickly rejected Parker Solar Anal Probe. That just went nowhere.
Oh, my goodness.
But Parker, we should say, now this is interesting. This is the first NASA spacecraft named after a living person. It's this physicist named Eugene Parker. He's like 91 years old. It did not say he was probed by this thing. I think that he was
very good.
Entirely.
I've seen a picture of him, and he looks like he's.
I'm not one to judge. I'm just saying he came up. He came up with this. He's a professor emeritus, incidentally, at the University of Chicago.
So what's this probing? I mean, do they take chemicals, for 3 days before this happens?
No, this is not TSA-style probing. This is something entirely different. So on the 12th of August, NASA launched the Parker Solar Probe, and it's heading to the sun, which is, just in case you were wondering, Justin, our closest star.
It is.
It's not Proxima Centauri or anything like that. We're talking about the sun. Now, we've never really studied the sun in any great depth before. We've been to the moon multiple times. We've studied all the other planets. We had the New Horizons, satellite that flew around Pluto.
I'm guessing the heat has something to do with that.
Yes.
All right. Let's turn it up just a little bit.
I'm really using my brain power here.
They were like, there's got to be some energy there. We're just guessing. So the scientific goals, the primary goals for this mission is to trace the flow of energy and to explore what accelerates solar winds. And the reason that's important is because that can be a great disruptor of communications, telecommunications, satellites. Justin, is on his phone checking all his texts and his social media accounts.
Why are you always picking on me?
That could be interrupted at any time.
By a solar flare.
By a solar flare. That's exactly right.
Okay.
So there's a lot that we can actually learn about the sun, and a lot we still don't know about how the nature of it and how it works. So over the span of the next 7 years, Parker is going to take 24 orbits around the sun, and it's going to use the planet Venus 7 times as a gravity flyby.
Oh, really?
It's a gravity assist.
That's cool.
Oh, yeah.
So you think about it like
Slingshot.
this. So the Earth is rotating around the sun. We theorize.
Some people believe.
Some people are
Yeah.
led to believe.
Is the sun flat? No.
You know, they haven't said that yet.
Okay.
I don't know if you can prove that it's not, Frank.
That's right.
If you
Well-
look at it, it looks flat.
It looks like just a little flat disc, but I'm assuming if we stick a probe in it, it's going to let us know.
I'm assuming it's at least hot. But okay, so what it's going to, the Earth revolves around a sun, and if you launch any type of spacecraft off the Earth, it has to go tens of thousands of miles an hour to get enough lift, enough thrust to get off the Earth and past the gravitational pull. But the problem is that we're also being pulled toward the sun. So we're slingshotting around the Earth, once a year.
Around the sun.
Around the sun. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to spread misinformation there. Around the sun.
Fake news alert.
Fake news alert. That's right. The problem is that if they sent the probe straight up, it would eventually be pulled off orbit because it's also being pulled by the same gravitational pull from the sun. So what they're actually doing is launching it what would seemingly be the wrong direction. And by doing so, it's going to be able to gain some of that direction it needs to head toward the sun and then go around Venus to do a course correction. And every time it goes around Venus and heads back toward the sun, it's going to get closer and closer, and each iteration is going to bring it closer and closer to the sun. And so the idea is that with each flyby, they'll be able to gain more information, get it closer to the corona, it's called, which is not a lime wedge at the top of it, the one that Frank's thinking about here.
I am. That
Not the
sounds
corona
delicious.
you're used to.
That actually sounds really good right now.
Yeah.
It's happy hour time.
We have not been drinking.
We normally did these conversations with liquor. That's what we're
Yes.
missing.
And a Corona
That's
would
why you
be
guys are so
really good
boring.
right now.
I haven't been drinking.
That explains everything. Oh, my
Right.
goodness.
Justin takes one edible and he's good to go. But yeah, no, that's the idea. And so what they're going to do, and you think, how does this thing not fry? Right?
Yes.
Like when it gets in proximity to the sun, how's this thing not
I
going to
know, I
burn up?
burned stuff in the oven.
Well, Justin, they've actually made full provision for that. They thought Justin's going to be wondering about this, and they actually built that into the system here. So it's got a heat shield, okay? And it's not, we're not talking about
It's like an umbrella.
It's a sophisticated umbrella.
Okay.
multicolored
okay.
patterns
You could think of
everywhere.
it that way.
I've got
Right.
the Mary Poppins flies around the sun. Okay, great picture. So what are we
So-
going to get to know?
This is a white shield. It's 8 feet long. And
wow.
it's mostly carbon reinforced, carbon foam, 97% air. And the heat shield has this auto-correcting sensor on it, which allows it within literally inches to move it left, right, up, and down, depending on the direction the
To
solar...
create a shadow.
That's exactly right.
Aha.
And so the thickness of this, it's 4.5 inches thick, this heat shield.
Not very much.
It's not as much as I thought either. Like, I was surprised at how relatively thin that is.
How hot is it going to be right there?
Oh, super hot. So so within the corona of the sun, it can get up to 2 to 3 million degrees Fahrenheit. Okay.
Jeez.
That's pretty hot.
However,
That's self-cleaning.
yes,
Yes.
NASA actually gave an example of this. It's due to the density of particles. So there's a lot of plasma within the corona of the sun. And that means that the particles are relatively sparse. And so that lack of density is actually going to help it not be cooked when it gets into proximity. So think about it. NASA gave the example. You stick your hand in an oven and you
Which
feel
we do
heat,
all the time.
Which, I see Justin do on a regular basis. And you're going to feel heat, but it's not going to be 350 degrees worth of heat immediately on your hand. It's just heat. If you stick your hand, though, in a pot of boiling water, you're going to instantly feel every nuanced particle of heat that little container has to offer. And the reason is it's the density of particles in the difference between sticking your hand in boiling water versus sticking it in a warm environment.
So it's the water
just
is
air.
denser than air.
That is correct.
Huh. And so I'm assuming that the corona is way less dense than air. Is that kind of where that goes?
It's only going to be hitting random particles as it's within that area. And the white shield is going to be deflecting light, while the water coolant, it's coming with ion.
Oh, really?
It's deionized water. The surface of the heat shield will only reach peaks of about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit due to all these factors. Or 1,400 degrees Celsius for those listeners tuning in any other country.
Wow, you mean everybody else has this figured out
Correct.
except us.
Now, this thing's going to be traveling at a speed of 430,000 miles per hour.
430,000?
430,000 miles per hour. To put that into context, that's generally the speed that Justin drives.
Well, that's going to be. I thought these other, like the Voyagers, are going like 30,000 miles an hour.
This thing's going
That's
very
right.
fast.
So that'll be by far the fastest man-made object.
And it's by far the closest man-made object ever heading toward the sun.
That's really cool.
430,000 miles an hour is like going from Philadelphia to D.C. in a second.
Jeez. Okay, so I got a question for you, Justin.
You
Or
keep calling him
Jesse.
Justin.
Why do I do that?
It's okay.
Okay, well, maybe I'll direct it to Justin.
I'd like to answer the question.
So, do they talk about EMPs? You know,
The electromagnetic pulse.
yes, yeah, because there's this rumor out there that if we get an EMP, a big enough solar flare,
Yes.
we could lose all of our electronics. Our mobile phones would be fried.
Yes. That is, if you read between the lines of the things that they want to learn, that was definitely implicit in the study that this thing is taking, is all forms of communication and telecommunication and the ways that the sun disrupts them. And so I think that's going to be something that they're going to look at is if there's a solar flare or solar wind, or just in general, our relationship to this ginormous star that is emitting radiation and has an orbit that we don't fully even understand yet, that we're learning that there are planets and things that orbit it that we're just learning about now. How does that affect the third rock from the sun, to borrow something I said earlier?
Indeed. Oh, cleverness.
And it's fascinating to me because this is a body that we rely on so heavily, not only to keep us in orbit, but for sunlight, for heat, for energy, and we know very little about it. And so what happens as, over the next 7 years, Parker starts sending back information that perhaps changes the way that we look at the way that the sun works with us and how that works with telecommunications. Are things going to change as far as satellite relationships? How data is transmitted from satellite down to Earth? Are things going to have to be kind of changed as far as our mindset? And how quickly will those changes take place in tech companies like Apple and telecommunication companies that suddenly find themselves with new information on how to make their product more efficient?
Is it really an issue of efficiency or is it protection? Like, how do
think there's a
we
lot of
keep
both.
from getting cooked?
Yes, there's definitely both. I think the scientific community has a lot to learn about the nature of the sun, and the commercial community has a lot to learn about how to prevent or how to handle further disruptions.
The interesting thing is, as circuitry gets smaller and smaller, and we get chips that have more and more density, they actually become more and more frail. There's, we're at circuits now that, if you breathe on them, you could damage them, but they've got to be encased, in some kind of substrate on top to, preserve what's going on inside. But solar flares, apparently, or EMPs, could just cook everything that we've got right now. And so nothing's been designed, as I'm understanding it, with that possibility in mind.
Well, that could be the next gold rush for developers, is to create, as people were with silicon, and they realized at some point we're running out of things that we can do with silicon. And so eventually they start going to quantum computing. And so what happens, who are the visionaries, the foresight thinkers who are going to get this data over the next 7 years and start developing things that
are toast resistant.
Correct.
Are they going to be studying the nano flares at all? Because I heard that can happen after a good probing.
Were you prepared for that comment? Were you just thinking about that the whole
Oh
time?
no, I just thought of that off the top of my head.
You know, after good probing, there's definitely going to be some flare-ups.
There will be flares. Oh, for sure.
Interesting. Like, so I was just hearing that if a supernova happened within, I don't know the distance. It was very far from us, but it could destroy us. I'm wondering if that's at all related to the same kind of energy that is causing these disruptions, just with this much smaller scale, within regular operation of the sun.
Well, as far as human beings being on this planet and interacting with it in the way that we do, we've had innumerable solar flares that have caused disruptions on this planet for however many millions of years. So the concept would be, if we're able to predict them to a better degree, or if at the very least we're able to understand the sun and its behavior better, how do we make that scientifically valuable, commercially profitable, and then obviously realistically viable on a day-to-day basis to make our lives better, to make telecommunications more efficient? And then ultimately, what can we learn about the sun and its future? This star that eventually will burn out.
And since we're Americans, how can we profit from it?
That's right.
The Parker Solar Probe is actually going to plant a flag right on the surface of the sun, just like we did on the moon.
And so we'll claim it as property.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure we'll build a hotel there before long.
Elon Musk is already working on it.
Yes.
He's sending a Tesla to the sun. What's the other interesting thing about this? They actually they sent a memory card on the Parker Solar Probe. It contains over 1 million names of people on a microchip, and you could have had your name go to the sun.
It's my name on it.
You know, I did not put your name. I tried to put your name. I think I misspelled it, though.
I'm totally not interested in this anymore.
No, I think the problem is I spelled it Justine, so that's... you went as
harsh.
Justine Blaney.
Well,
I'm
that's
sorry
okay.
about that.
That's fine.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
All right, yeah, it was the thought that counts.
Thank you.
So how did you go about getting your name on this
I
list?
did not put my name on this. I actually put my name on something heading to Mars. In November, there's a lander landing on Mars that actually has my name on a microchip.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I got a confirmation from NASA and everything.
So what do you get out of that experience by having your name on the microchip?
Respect.
Finally, somebody will respect me.
Exactly.
But somehow you're going to have to prove this. Because all of us could be a little skeptical about whether your name is
I'm going to
really
show
there or
you
not.
the certificate I got from NASA. And, if it comes from NASA, I don't think flat earthers are going to believe it, but at least you two
Yeah,
will.
exactly.
Well,
you
you
don't
need
even know that
credentials.
Mars is out there.
That's right. It's installed on the spacecraft's high-gain antenna, which probably means that... Here's the thing. I'm thinking we're kind of screwed, though, because if either the Mars rover or the Parker Solar Probe is intercepted by some kind of alien spaceship, and they know all our names that are on there, we're going to be the first to die. I know that. I just know we are...
They're going to come with
Come
a list.
after you.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's going to be like H.G. Wells all over again, just zapping us.
They're
from-
too busy doing crop circles and scaring people and
Well, they invented probing, so...
Well, that is true. Steal you in the night and let's
right.
do a solar probe.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is interesting, though. Just knowing that we are reaching out in so many different ways to understand our universe is just really an exciting thing.
it is. It's always that's again like the thing I love about science is it's standing on the shoulders of giants, and each of us gets to build on the cumulative knowledge of all of humanity up until today, and so we're not starting from square one. We're getting to incrementally move things forward, and as this technology continues to accelerate, it's just gonna be very exciting. I think we're gonna get to see some really cool things in our life. Everything is built on smaller building blocks, which is truly fascinating because how far can we go down, and at what point do we reach the end? If there is an end, can we keep finding these smaller and smaller and smaller things? And
Or the larger and larger
again,
and larger
on the other
things.
side, the larger and larger and larger things. But I think I have something that I can close this out with that I think is actually relates pretty nicely with that. So I'm just going to read this thing that I wrote last night. I was actually drinking late into the night, and this is what came out.
So it was a normal night.
Just a drunken stupor. Wisdom occurred.
Average, regular night.
3 a.m. Mind wandering. So, we are merely a collection of atoms, a symphony of cells. Nothing more, nothing less. Our memories, our hopes, our love, these exist as electricity flowing between neurons and synapses. We are no more special than a blade of grass, a deep red sunset, or a wave crashing upon the sand. So let us simply be happy. Let us be a happy collection of cells. Let us do what is necessary to reduce suffering, increase life, and secure more firmly the future of any cells which come into being after our own. At some point, this entire universe is going to collapse upon itself, and nothing we have ever done or ever could will matter. This is an undeniable truth, that we can never be sure of any enduring future, whether we are alive or what will exist tomorrow. So make this present moment all that it can be. This we are, a collection of cells, and this is all we will ever be. So I am content. We are a species who has created some mighty feats, great buildings, societies, science, discovery. But it is all still undeniably small within the cosmos. Nothing matters if we do not enjoy it. Stop for any moment you are able, stand still, breathe deeply, and feel the life flowing through you. This is all you possess, and this is all that matters. You are alive for a very short time, so make the most of it, however you see fit.
I love it. That could only come from our resident PhD. That's awesome. You know, I see in that more about the art of living than the science of living.
Absolutely.
And there's a
that's
merging
tremendous.
of the two, isn't
and
there?
there must be.
It all comes from the same collection of atoms, right?
Exactly right.
Thank you for sharing your drunken writings with us. Available at Justin's website, justinblaney.com. Well, that's a podcast, if I ever heard one. It's
Did
called...
you find it interesting?
I found it very interesting, specifically the things I said, but you guys are okay. The program's called I Thought This Was Interesting, and hopefully you did too, and we would love to know what you think is interesting. So we'd love for you to reach out on our social media channels, as well as our website. I'm going to give you both of our website domains. They'll get you to the same place. IThoughtThisWasInteresting.com or ITTWI.com. You like how I did that, Frank?
That was available,
Very
wasn't it?
nice. It was available.
That domain wasn't taken.
We bought it. We did buy it,
It's
right?
ours.
Okay.
We possess it.
IThoughtThisWasInteresting.com or ITTWI.com. We'd love to hear from you, what your thoughts are about the program or anything else you think is interesting, because so might we.
And then we'll talk about it.
That's right. I'm Jesse Bauer.
I'm Justin Blaney.
I'm Frank Coker.
And we'll talk to you next time on the podcast called I Thought This Was Interesting.
.com.
You're such a marketer.
You've been listening to I Thought This Was Interesting, featuring Dr. Justin Blaney, Frank Coker, and Jesse Bauer. Go to ITTWI.com to subscribe and join the community. Support future episodes with as little as $1 per month at patreon.com/ITTWI. The hosts would love to hear from you. Email your questions, ideas, press inquiries, sponsorships, requests, or anything else to info@ITTWI.com. This podcast is copyrighted and distributed for the private use of our audience. Any other use of this podcast without the host's consent is prohibited and could result in alien abduction or impotence. Don't say we didn't warn you. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of I Thought This Was Interesting.